Welcome to another story about betrayal. Kansas, 2006. Aiden Manning squatted next to the peeling fuselage of an old 1946 Piper Pa-18 Super Cub. The plane was a sorry sight. Cracked yellow paint, rusted rivets on the wings, a removed engine lying on a tarp nearby. The large barn smelled of dust, machine oil, and dry hay. Aiden's grandfather's workshop, his sanctuary. "Grandpa, will it ever rise into the sky again?" Aiden asked hopefully, running his hand over the wing. He was 15, and he spent every free minute here, among the tools and disassembled parts of the plane. Grandpa Raymond Manning, bent over the Piper plans laid out on his workbench, was in his 70s, but his eyes still lit up with enthusiasm when the subject of aviation came up. "Of course, it will take off," the grandfather said confidently, straightening up. "The metal is strong. We will fix the wings. We will overhaul the engine, buy spare parts, and restore it. And it will take off, I promise you." Aiden smiled. There was nothing more important to him than those words. His grandfather had always been his support and inspiration. It was from him that the boy had absorbed his love for airplanes and the sky. While his father and mother seemed to live solely on the successes of his older brother Luke on the basketball court, here in the barn there was a world of its own, a world where an old plane could regain its wings and dreams could come true. "I'll help," Aiden said seriously, looking straight into his grandfather's eyes. "I'm ready to learn everything that's needed, just so the Cub can fly again." Grandfather placed a calloused hand on his shoulder and squeezed it lightly, nodding approvingly. "I know, kid. You're a natural mechanic. You have a talent for sensing machinery. When I'm gone, you'll have to pick up the baton and finish what you started. Can you handle it?" A lump formed in Aiden's throat. He didn't want to think about the day when his grandfather would be gone. But he understood that time was inexorable. "I can handle it," he answered quietly. "I promise you, Grandpa, the Piper will take off." Raymond smiled and leaned over the drawings again. "Remember," he said quietly, "an airplane is like a person. If you take care of it, it will serve you faithfully. The main thing is patience and attentiveness. There is no place for haste. Better slowly and correctly than quickly and haphazardly." Aiden nodded, taking in every word. He had already learned a lot from his grandfather: how to rivet aluminum skin sheets, how to check fuel tanks for leaks, and how to clean the carburetor of an old engine. For the first time in his life, he felt needed and capable of doing something great. Voices were heard outside. Through the open barn door came the ringing laughter of his older brother Luke and the cheers of his father. Luke had just returned from basketball practice, and his father was animatedly discussing something with him, probably the latest goal scored or the upcoming game. Aiden looked away for a moment, listening. Grandfather glanced at the door and shook his head. "Well, here you go again. Your father only talks about basketball," he muttered quietly, so that no one in the yard could hear, as if there was nothing else in life. Aiden didn't answer, but his chest hurt. He had long been accustomed to being in the shadow of Luke, the local star of the school team. His parents were proud of Luke, took him to tournaments, and hired a personal trainer. Compared to his athletic achievements, Aiden's passion for aviation seemed like a mere pastime to them. It was as if his grandfather had read his thoughts. "Don't worry," he said, patting his grandson on the back. "Everyone has their own path. Let Luke chase a ball if that's what he likes. And yours is the sky and technology. And believe me, grandson, the world of aviation is no worse than a basketball court. It's just that the spotlights are brighter, that's all." Aiden smiled sadly. He knew that his grandfather was right, but sometimes he still wished that his parents would be interested in his successes, his dreams. For now, only his grandfather shared this passion with him. "Should I tell you a story about this cub?" Grandpa suddenly suggested. Of course, Aiden perked up. He had already heard parts of this story, but he never tired of listening to his grandfather. Raymond ran his hand over the plane's side, darkened by time. "I bought it right after the war," he began, his eyes shining with memories. "In 1946, I was young and hot-blooded. I came back from the service and wanted to have my own plane. I made some money repairing equipment, so I bought this Piper Cub. So many things are connected with it. Your grandmother and I flew it over the cornfields at dawn, how romantic. And then I showed your father the sky in it when he was still a boy. I thought he would follow in my footsteps, but it didn't work out. He got scared during the flight and never wanted to fly again. Grandfather chuckled. And you weren't scared when I first lifted you into the sky on this plane, remember? Of course, Aiden remembered. He was about 6 years old. His grandfather sat him in his cockpit at the airfield, and then briefly lifted the Piper off the ground. They rose only about 20 meters and immediately landed back. But those moments were forever etched in his memory. The trembling of the engine, the roar of the propeller, and the feeling of flight, albeit very short. He was choking with delight then. I immediately realized then, I want to become a pilot or a mechanic, just to be near airplanes, Aiden said quietly, looking at the plane. And Dad, he's probably just different. Each to his own, the grandfather repeated. Your father found himself in business, your mother in family affairs, Luke in sports. But I see that you have inherited my streak. Don't doubt yourself, boy, and we will lift the plane. Together. They set to work. Grandfather told them something as they went along, how to properly cover a wing with fabric, how to repair electrical wiring. Aiden listened, trying to remember. Time flew by until grandmother appeared on the threshold, calling them to dinner. Run and wash your hands, men, she said tenderly. And that's enough for today. It's already dark. Grandfather took off his worn cap and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. Aiden carefully closed the toolbox. Come here again tomorrow after school, he said, more as a statement than a question. Of course, the grandfather smiled. You and I have a lot to do. As Aiden stepped out of the barn into the warm Kansas evening air, he stole a glance toward the house. In the yard, his father was still discussing something with Luke. Apparently, he couldn't stop talking about practice. His mother was bustling around, wiping sweat from Luke's flushed forehead with a towel. When they saw their youngest son, they nodded, as if to say he'd finally shown up for dinner. Never mind, thought Aiden, lowering his eyes. The day will come when they too will see what I am worth. Piper will take off again, and I will definitely show them that I have chosen the right path. With these thoughts, he went to wash himself, looking forward to tomorrow in the barn, the day when he would become one step closer to his dream. Several months passed. Autumn was full of sporting events for the Manning family. The eldest son, 17-year-old Luke, shone on the court as part of the school team. Each of his matches turned into a holiday for his parents. They cheered their son from the stands. His father pumped his fist in the air when Luke scored the decisive goal. His mother screamed louder than all the fans. Aiden was also present at the games, sitting next to his parents, trying to share their joy. But to be honest, basketball didn't interest him much. He tried to be happy for his brother. After all, Luke was a good player, and the team often won thanks to him. However, somewhere deep inside, Aiden felt detached. It seemed to him that he was just an extra at a family celebration dedicated to other people's achievements. After one of the winning matches, on the way home, my father spoke animatedly about the game. Did you see Luke hit the three-pointer at the end? Like a pro. He marveled, looking in the rearview mirror at his son in the back seat. With a game like that, they'll get him into Duke, I'm sure. We'll have to go to the Duke open house again, meet the coaches, his mother chimed in, and retake the SAT, get a higher score. We've already arranged for a math tutor, Luke. Yes, Mom, Luke responded lazily, but his face showed that he was pleased by the attention. I'll try. Aiden sat by the window, watching the lights of the night city flicker past the glass. He was happy for his brother, but the conversation hurt him. It turned out that his parents were going to take Luke to try out for Duke University, a prestigious university with one of the best basketball programs. They also hired an expensive tutor so that Luke could get a high SAT score for a scholarship, all for their eldest son. You know, Aiden suddenly couldn't help himself. I also have news at school. Today, the physics teacher praised me for my airplane model project. There was a pause in the salon. His father glanced at him through the mirror. "A model airplane? You mean that flying club of yours? Well done," he said casually, and immediately returned to discussing basketball with Luke. The mother didn't add anything either. She just smiled tensely at her youngest son, as if checking a box. "We've listened, and that's enough." Aiden looked away to the window and didn't try to tell any more. He suddenly had a strong desire to go back to his grandfather's barn, to the unfinished plane, to where he felt he belonged. They returned home late. Luke immediately went up to his room. He still had some homework to finish. His father went to call a trainer he knew to discuss his son's prospects. His mother went to the kitchen to make Luke a protein shake for the night. Aiden lingered in the hallway, taking off his jacket. He was still clutching a small plastic airplane figurine in his hands, a prize he had won at a school technical creativity competition a week ago. He wanted to show it to his parents, but they hadn't found the time to listen to him in a week. He turned the figurine over in his fingers and quietly put it on the shelf. That night, he went up to his room with a heavy heart. On the wall was a poster of a vintage P-51 Mustang fighter jet, a gift from his grandfather for his last birthday. Aiden stared at it for a long time, trying to ease the bitterness. He loved his parents very much, and he knew that they loved him. But sometimes it seemed as if in their eyes there was only one son who really mattered: Luke, the future sports star. Another year passed. Luke graduated from high school and indeed received an athletic scholarship, maybe not to Duke, but to a strong Big 12 university. His parents rejoiced. Their firstborn was going to conquer great heights. Luke left for college, and the house was empty without his loud voice and eternal talk of basketball. Aiden was 16. He was also about to graduate from high school, and he was slowly looking at his options for further study. Most of all, he wanted to go to a school that taught aviation technology. He learned from his grandfather about colleges where you can get an A&P airframe and powerplant aircraft mechanic license. The best choice seemed to be Embry-Riddle University in Florida, a prestigious place for future aviators. Tempting, but also expensive. Meanwhile, at the very end of the year, Grandpa Raymond fell ill. At first, it seemed like a common cold, but it dragged on. By spring, Grandpa began to fail. He could no longer go out to the barn every day. He was no longer strong enough. Aiden tried to visit him after school, helped him as much as he could brew tea, read the newspaper out loud, told him the news. Grandpa asked how his studies were going, whether his grandson had abandoned the plane. And each time, Aiden assured him, no, of course he had not abandoned it. He continued to visit the barn alone from time to time, disassembled the Cub's engine into units and assemblies, cleaned it, cataloged the parts, dreaming of starting to assemble it for real. In June, Grandpa passed away. A cold had caused complications with his heart. Half the city was burying Raymond Manning. He was a respected man, a veteran. Many knew and loved him. At the funeral, Aiden stood with his head down, unable to hold back his tears. His mother was quietly crying next to him, hugging him. His father looked gloomy and confused apparently. It had only just dawned on him that his parents were gone. Luke couldn't come. He had summer training at the university, and the family decided not to distract him. After the funeral, there was a reading of the will. It turned out that the grandfather had officially left Aiden his plane, that same Piper Cub, and all the tools and equipment from the barn. The parents were surprised. They were thinking of selling the old junk, but since such was the will of the deceased, they did not argue. And they did not care about the plane. The grief from the loss and the hassle of inheritance took up all their attention. Father scratched his head when he heard about the plane. "Well, if he left it to you, it means he believed you would do something with it," he said slowly. "But I'm afraid this plane is a burden, Aiden. You can't find spare parts for it even with fire, and its restoration would cost as much as a Boeing wing." The mother added cautiously, "Maybe it would be wiser to sell it to hobbyists for spare parts. Your grandfather wouldn't be offended. It would be better to use the money for education." But Aiden, for the first time during the whole difficult day, firmly shook his head. "No, I'll take care of the plane myself. I promised my grandfather." The parents looked at each other. They did not argue at that moment, realizing that their son's stubbornness could not be broken. At the end of the day, when the last relatives had left, Aiden quietly entered his grandfather's empty barn. Everything here stood still, as if time had stopped without its owner. The rolled-up blueprints and neatly laid-out tools were still lying on the workbench. It seemed as if the door would creak at any moment, and his grandfather would come in his shabby cap and say, "Well, grandson, shall we continue working?" But the doors were silent. Aiden looked up at the tarpaulin-covered Piper glider. His heart ached. "I'll finish, I promise," he whispered into the silence of the barn, as if addressing his grandfather's spirit. "Your plane will take off, Grandpa. I'll lift it into the sky no matter what." Tears welled up in Aiden's eyes, but he held them back. He knew he could cry now, but then he had to roll up his sleeves and work. He wouldn't let anyone call his grandfather's plane junk. This would be his life's project, and he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. In the summer, Aiden often disappeared into the barn, sorting through all of his grandfather's inheritance. This helped him get over the grief. His parents turned a blind eye to this, let him fool around, they thought. The main thing was that he didn't neglect his studies. The senior year was coming up, and the parents hoped that their youngest son would decide on a normal profession. But Aiden had already made up his mind. He just hadn't told them yet. January. An official letter from Embry-Riddle University arrived in Aiden's name. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and read. He was accepted to the A&P program and even given a partial scholarship, 40% of the tuition fees. It was both happiness and bitterness. 40% is a lot, but the remaining 60% plus accommodation and textbooks had to be paid for by himself. That evening at dinner, he decided to tell his parents the news. His father was leafing through the newspaper, and his mother was setting out everyone's plates. "I got accepted to Embry-Riddle," Aiden blurted out, unable to contain his smile. "And they gave me a 40% scholarship." Father looked up from his newspaper. "Where did you accept them?" "Embry-Riddle University in Florida. They have one of the best aviation maintenance programs," Aiden explained quickly. "Remember when I applied?" The mother frowned. "Is this that expensive aviation college?" "Well, yes, it's not cheap, but the scholarship will cover almost half," Aiden answered, trying to maintain a confident tone. "I can take out a loan for the rest and earn extra money." The father put the newspaper down and looked at his son searchingly. "A loan? A part-time job? Son, can you imagine what this will cost? We can't help you financially. We already have a mortgage on our house, plus we help Luke with his campus expenses." The mother nodded in agreement. "Yes, it's not easy for Luke either. His sports scholarship only partially covers his tuition. We send him money every month for living expenses. And now you're going to the other end of the country." "I'm not asking for money," Aiden answered tightly, feeling the joy of the news instantly fade. "I just hoped that you would be happy for me. It's a good university, a famous one. After that, I'll have excellent prospects." Father sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. "Where are the prospects? To tinker around in the garage? Well, how much do they pay aircraft mechanics there? It's pennies. You'd better think about something more reliable. Maybe go to our community college, get a basic education, and then, if you like the Army, say, you can become a mechanic there. Or maybe you should try business like me." Aiden felt his insides sink. He looked to his mother for support. "Mom, this is my dream: airplanes, technology. You know," he said quietly. The mother smiled sadly, twirling the towel in her hands. "I know, dear, but dreams are dreams, and life is complicated. Your father and I simply cannot afford to support you in Florida. You can't even afford a plane ticket there. We don't have that kind of money right now." "I'm not asking for support," Aiden exclaimed hotly, feeling despair. "I'll take out a federal student loan. I was approved for $15,000. It will last almost the first year, and I'll work in parallel. I can do it myself, really." Father shook his head. "Getting into debt at your age is not the best idea, and working and studying will overexert you. Besides, he glanced at his wife. What kind of environment is Florida? A foreign state, no one nearby. Here, at least my mother and I would have looked after you. But there? That's my dream, Dad, Aiden said stubbornly. There are no programs like that here in Kansas. This is a chance. A chance to ruin your health, muttered the father. Okay, decide for yourself, of course. You're almost an adult. But don't expect money from us. We've said our word. The mother wanted to add something, but only sighed heavily and turned away, wiping her eyes. She felt sorry for her son, but the family budget was already at its limit. The dinner passed in oppressive silence. In his room, Aiden sat over the open letter from the university and felt the resentment suffocating him. Never before had he felt so alone. Even his grandfather was no longer there to support him. But the more he thought, the firmer his decision became. He would go anyway, no matter what. And he began to prepare. In the months remaining before graduation, Aiden took out a student loan $15,000 in federal loans to cover part of his tuition. He sold an old used car that his father had once given him for a nominal fee and got another couple thousand. He decided to put this money aside for unexpected expenses. A plane ticket to Florida was beyond his means, and his pride would not allow him to ask his parents for the trip. At the beginning of August, having said goodbye to his parents, Aiden set off on his journey. The farewell was cool. His father shook his hand at the threshold and said only, "Take care of yourself." His mother hugged him, sobbed, and asked him to call at least occasionally. No one talked about helping with money. Aiden had a hiking backpack with him, filled to the bare minimum. Clothes, a few books on aviation, a laptop old, but working and the item dearest to his heart. His grandfather's set of snap-on wrenches in a metal case. He had inherited this tool, and Aiden decided that wherever he was, his grandfather's set would be close by like a talisman. He got to Florida as best he could. Partly by hitchhiking trucks on the highway would give him rides from state to state, partly by Greyhound buses when he could find a route for a modest fee. He drove across half the country. Endless plains gave way to hills. A cold February night gave way to a warm southern morning. Sometimes truckers would give him a lift, treat him to coffee, and ask where they were going. Aiden would answer honestly to study, to his dream of flying. Many wished him luck. This gave him strength. The journey took several grueling days. He spent the nights at bus stations or on the road, turning over plans in his mind. It was scary, too alone in strange cities, without support, but a spark of determination burned in his chest. This was his path, and he would not turn away. Finally, Aiden reached Daytona Beach, Florida. That was where the campus of Embry-Riddle University was located. Tired, dusty, with a backpack over his shoulder, he walked out into the sun-drenched street next to the campus. Palm trees swayed in a light breeze, and in the distance he could see hangars and the runway of a training airfield. Aiden caught his breath. He was really here. "Well, let's go," he said quietly to himself, adjusting the strap of his backpack. "Your new life is beginning, buddy." He stepped onto the campus feeling both terrified and excited. Ahead lay the unknown, hard work, studying, but also a chance to make his dream come true. Aiden had to grow up fast, being alone and 1,000 miles from home. During the day, he studied at Embry-Riddle, and in the evenings and nights, he worked to survive. A couple of weeks into the semester, he found a part-time job at the Daytona Beach Airport, at the FBO Daytona Jet Center. It was a small private service at the airfield, refueling planes, washing them, towing them, simple work, but perfect for a student. Shifts often fell in the evening. After classes, Aiden would race on his bike. He bought a cheap bike secondhand so as not to spend money on transportation to the jet center hangars. There, he would put on his uniform, a blue jumpsuit with the company's patch, and work until midnight and longer, refueling business jets with Avgas 100 LL fuel, hauling heavy hoses, washing the fuselages of planes blackened by exhaust fumes with a rag. The work was dirty and hard, and often the only reward was a free dinner from a vending machine, a chocolate bar, and a can of soda. Sometimes, when there was a window between flights, Aiden would find a secluded corner in the hangar, for example, a utility room for inventory, and literally collapsed there to sleep for an hour or two. He didn't have money for a normal dorm, so he rented a bed in a cheap hostel not far from the airport. There were 4 equally troubled students living in the room, and there was no peace either day or night. Sometimes Aiden thought that the only way he could get a good night's sleep was on a pile of rags in the utility room of the hangar between night shifts. But he did not allow himself to complain. He had chosen this path himself. Studying was not easy. He had to pore over textbooks on aerodynamics, materials science, and study engine designs. The professors were strict, demanding precision. Sometimes during lectures, Aiden would simply nod off from fatigue, but he could barely hold on liters of coffee helped. His colleagues at the jet center were surprised. The kid was skinny, but he worked like 3. Gradually, they began to respect him. The senior technician, a Mexican named Carlos, asked one evening when the two of them were filling up a Cessna citation, "Dude, why are you so upset? Take it easy, or you'll overexert yourself." Aiden wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. "Everything is fine, I can handle it." "Are you studying somewhere?" Carlos nodded at the folder with notes he noticed in the corner. Aiden brought it so that he could sometimes do his homework between flights. "Yeah, Embry-Riddle to be an aircraft mechanic," Aiden replied. Carlos whistled. "Wow, that's cool. I didn't study there myself, but I heard about it. They probably pay like crap, huh?" Aiden shrugged. "It's enough for food and bicycle parts," he joked. They finished refueling. Carlos patted the guy on the shoulder. "Hold on, muchacho. If things get tough, signal, we'll replace you." Such simple support warmed the soul. Far from home, any kind gesture meant a lot. On the rare days off that he had between shifts and school, Aiden did something that really brought him joy. He began restoring his grandfather's Piper Cub. While the plane was physically in Kansas, he had neither the money nor the space to drag it to Florida. Aiden decided to do what was possible from a distance. For example, repairing and assembling the engine and instruments piece by piece. Grandpa's Continental 0170, a 4-cylinder piston cub engine, had been taken apart in his barn that summer, down to the last screw, and the parts had been carefully stored in boxes. Before leaving, he had selected the most important components, the carburetor, magneto, fuel pump, and mailed them to himself in Daytona. The shipping had been expensive, but now, in his rare free time, he could sit in the corner of the jet center hangar. Carlos had let him use the workbench after his shifts and tinker with these parts. Aiden started an online blog where he posted photos and notes about the restoration process. He called it Heritage Cub in honor of his grandfather's legacy. He wrote at night when no one was in the back room. He wrote honestly, as it was, "I'm cleaning a 1946 carburetor, there's solid slag inside. But it's okay, we'll clean it and it'll work." Or, "Today I managed to buy a set of cylinders on sale on eBay for cheap, although I'll have to grind them down, there's wear." The blog was only read by a couple dozen people so far, mostly the same fans of vintage aviation. But Aiden already knew 1 or 2 regular commentators by their nicknames. A certain old aviator advised how best to remove carbon deposits, and a user named Warbirdfan praised them for their persistence. One such late evening, Aiden opened his laptop and started a new blog post. 3:20. The hangar is empty. I'm working on Grandpa's Cub again. Today, I'm disassembling and cleaning the Stromberg carburetor. It was black from slag on the outside, but the inside is not so bad. The parts are still strong. I cleaned the channels, replaced the seals. It seems that this baby will again deliver fuel like new. He posted the entry and was surprised to find that within half an hour, there were already comments. Old Aviator: "Well done, man. I read your previous posts, you have the right hands. The carburetor is cool. I flew on one myself. If the float chamber suddenly starts leaking, drop me a line. I have a repair kit." Warbirdfan: "I'm inspired by your work. Such projects are rare. Good luck getting the Piper to take off." Smiling, Aiden typed a response to Old Aviator: "Thank you. I'll definitely contact you if anything happens. I'm glad there are people who are interested." He closed his laptop with a warm feeling. Even though there were only a few people following the blog, they believed in it. Sometimes, especially in difficult moments, when fatigue accumulated and it seemed that there was no more strength, Aiden opened the blog page and reread the comments of support. This gave him strength. Somewhere out there, albeit virtually, people believed in him and waited for Piper to see the sky again. And so almost the entire first school year passed. By the summer of 2010, Aiden had passed his exams not brilliantly, but solidly. Another year, and he would receive his A&P mechanics license. In the meantime, summer was ahead and the opportunity to work more and earn money. He still lived modestly. He got by on fast food, rode his battered bicycle. All the extra money, even though there was little of it, he put aside for his dream. Someday to rent a trailer and transport a plane from Kansas to Florida, closer to himself. The summer was spent in intense work. Aiden took on extra shifts at the Jet Center, sometimes working 12-hour shifts. He tanned in the scorching Florida sun, becoming physically rough, but he also gained experience in servicing various aircraft, from Cessna trainers to King Air turboprops. At the same time, he was making progress on his grandfather's plane project. By the end of the summer, he had managed to completely overhaul the carburetor and magneto, replacing all the worn-out parts. He found a rare propeller on the Experimental Aircraft Association forum, the exact model as the one on the original Cub, and agreed to buy it from a collector in Georgia. He had to save up money and take a bus to pick it up, but now he had a virtually complete set of major parts. At the beginning of autumn, Aiden returned to classes already in the second year of the program. Now he felt more confident. Both in his studies, his hands already had experience of real work, and in everyday life, he finally got used to it. Even his parents seemed to have come to terms with his choice. Once every couple of weeks, his mother called to ask how things were going, and his father briefly inquired about his grades. The relationship remained cool, but at least the connection was not broken. Spring. Aiden had no time for fun. He was finishing his last semester of school. However, there was one event he couldn't miss: the annual Sun Fun Aviation Convention in Lakeland, Florida. It was a major aviation gathering that attracted pilots, mechanics, and collectors from all over the country. For Aiden, it was a chance to meet fellow old plane fans in person and, perhaps, find missing parts for his Piper. He took the day off from work and rode an old bus to Lakeland. There, among the brightly colored biplanes and roaring engines, he felt right at home. He wore a homemade badge around his neck that read, "Heritage Cub Restoration Aiden Manning," to make introductions easier. Aiden spent the day walking through rows of aircraft on display and tents of spare parts. He found a few little things he was looking for: an original Piper Cub fuel gauge, barely used, and a set of old aviation instruments for next to nothing. But his most important acquisition wasn't material. He met a lot of people. Somewhere at the IA booth, he struck up a conversation with a retiree who had once flown Cubs and wrote down his contact information. He learned from another mechanic how to get a rare brand of wing covering fabric. Later in the evening, tired but happy, Aiden entered the huge exhibition hangar. Their visitors were offered soft drinks and sandwiches, something like a buffet for participants. He took a plastic cup of lemonade and looked around, looking for a free place to sit. "Is the seat taken?" a good-natured voice said nearby. Aiden turned around. A burly man of about 50, graying at the temples, stood next to him, wearing a shirt with the Evans Aviation Service patch. The man nodded toward the folding chair at the table where his cap lay. "No, no, sit down," Aiden answered quickly. They sat down at a table together, sipping cold lemonade in silence for a couple of minutes. Finally, the man glanced at the badge on Aiden's chest and read aloud, "Heritage Cub Restoration. Are you restoring the Cub?" "Yes, a 1946 Piper Super Cub belonged to my grandfather." Aiden perked up, always ready to talk about a project. "I've been working on it for a couple of years now." "Seriously, can you handle it alone?" The man raised an eyebrow. "It's not an easy task. I try to do it little by little. I'm currently overhauling the engine. The plane itself is in Kansas. I can't drag it here. But I collect parts, I keep a blog. He nodded at the badge. The stranger extended a strong, calloused hand. Frank Evans. I'm a mechanic, owner of an aviation service in Florida. Evans Aviation Service, that's the patch, he grinned, pointing to the logo on his shirt. Aiden shook his hand firmly. Aiden Manning, nice to meet you. Likewise. So, you're blogging. I think I came across an article about restoring a cub. Wasn't that your post on the EA forum a couple of weeks ago? Aiden nodded happily. Yes, I posted a report on carburetor repair on the EA forum. I'm surprised you read it. It's a small world, Frank chuckled. I thought then, the guy writes intelligently, with soul. And what's interesting is that he's from Florida. That's how we met. He took a sip of lemonade and squinted, looking at Aiden. Listen, your eyes light up when you talk about the plane. It's obvious that you live for this business. Aiden was slightly embarrassed, but still admitted. Yes, sir. Aviation has been my passion since childhood. I am currently finishing my studies as an A&P mechanic, going to get my license. I work at the airport wherever I can, as long as I am close to the planes. Frank nodded. Good. There are few young people like that now. Everyone just wants startups and it. But here, real work with your hands. That's valuable. They got to talking. Frank explained that his service was based at a small airfield near Orlando. They serviced private jets, mostly single-engine Cessnas and Pipers, sometimes light twins. The business was small, with about 5 employees. Frank himself was a former military aviation technician who opened his own business after his service. You know, I have golden hands, he said, not bragging, but as a fact. Experience, wow, since the late 80s in aviation. I know my clients, they are all local. But here's what I understand, age. Not a boy anymore. We need to look for young blood, raise a replacement, and in general attract new ideas. Otherwise, it's somehow stagnant. Aiden listened without interrupting, feeling warmth inside. He was incredibly sympathetic to this frank, straightforward man. And somewhere deep inside, a thought appeared, what if this is a chance? You're right, he carefully interjected when Frank paused. New ideas are always needed. For example, the same internet blog. Thanks to it, people learned about my project and started communicating. This can help business too, if used correctly. Frank smiled at the corner of his mouth. Yeah, I read your notes. I'm not an internet expert, but I understand that it's worthwhile. Listen, Aiden, he suddenly changed the subject. What are you planning to do after graduation? Go back to Kansas? Honestly, I don't want to go back, admitted Aiden. There are few prospects for me there. I want to stay in Florida, work in my specialty. Jobs are tight right now. A lot of companies are downsizing. Frank rubbed his chin, then looked straight at Aiden. Let's do it this way. Come visit me sometime, take a look at my hangar. I'll introduce you to the guys. I'm interested in your ideas, and you might be interested in my experience. And then, who knows, maybe we'll come up with something. Aiden's heart began to pound. He tried to keep his face, but his voice shook with emotion. I would love to. When can I? Even this weekend. Here's my phone number. Call me. Frank took out a business card and handed it to the guy. The address is there too. Come, I'll be glad. They talked a little more about Grandpa's plane, and Frank promised to help him get the autopilot gyroscope that Aiden was missing. Then they shook hands firmly. When Frank left to talk to an old acquaintance, Aiden sat for a long time, forgetting about his fatigue. He was twirling a business card in his hands. Evans Aviation Service, Frank Evans, owner. The number and address were listed. This could be the very turn in fate that Aiden was afraid to even dream about. There was light in his soul. Somewhere outside, the sounds of the aviation festival were dying away. The sunset was beginning. Aiden left the hangar, feeling inspired. He looked at the sky, where a demonstration biplane was circling in the rays of the sun, and quietly said to himself, it seems that everything was not in vain. Grandpa, you would be happy if you knew where your cub brought me. At that moment, the smell of aviation gasoline avgas, which had soaked into the clothes, seemed sweet, the smell of hope and new opportunities. Summer. Aiden had successfully passed his final exams and received his A&P aircraft mechanic's license. Many roads now opened before him, but most of all, he was drawn by that very same invitation that Frank Evans had made at the rally. One fine June day, he went to the meeting in Frank's hangar. Evans Aviation Service was located on a small airfield outside Orlando. It was a modest hangar, but well kept. At the entrance was a sign with a propeller and the words, Evans Aviation. Inside, it smelled of aviation oil and paint. A couple of light aircraft were being serviced, a Cessna 172 with its hood up and a Bonanza with its landing gear disassembled. Several workers in coveralls were fiddling with tools. Frank greeted Aiden with a wide smile and a firm handshake. "I'm glad you came. Come in, I'll show you everything now." He energetically led the guest around the hangar. He introduced Aiden to his staff, two middle-aged mechanics who, judging by their respectful smiles, appreciated their boss. Then he showed them the equipment, an airplane lift, a propeller balancer, a parts warehouse. For Aiden, accustomed to the student workshop and other people's jet center hangars, it all seemed almost like paradise, his own aviation corner. Finally, they settled into a small office just inside the hangar. The fuselage of the Bonanza was visible through the glass. Daylight fell on them. A fan hummed steadily. Frank took 2 bottles of cola from the refrigerator and handed one to Aiden. "So, tell me, how was college?" he began casually. "Ready for adult life?" Aiden nodded, taking a sip of the cold drink. "Yes, sir. I got my diploma, my license too. I just haven't found a job yet. But you know, I really want to do what I love, restore old planes." Frank chuckled. "I know, boy, I know. Your cub is something. Okay, let's get down to business. I have a proposition for you." He put the bottle down and leaned forward, crossing his fingers. "I have been thinking for a long time about how to expand my business. I want to start restoring vintage airplanes. The market is niche, but there are clients, collectors, museums, wealthy enthusiasts. I can't do it alone. I don't have the strength or time. And I admit I need a youthful grip, like yours." Aiden listened with bated breath. "I'm proposing a partnership," Frank continued clearly. "I'm creating a new company that will focus specifically on historical aviation. I'm investing my money, equipment, and connections in it. You're investing your labor, talent, and, let's say, your existing small brand in the form of your blog and name. The terms are as follows. You'll receive a 30% stake in the company, but not right away, but gradually over 10 years. It's called vesting. Have you heard of it?" Aiden nodded. He knew something about such schemes for retaining partners. That is, Frank clarified, the first years the share is sort of in reserve. Each year of work gives you a part. Work 10 years, you will have a full 30%. If you suddenly leave earlier, you will get proportionally or lose the unsold percentage. This is so that we are both sure of the seriousness of our intentions. I, that you will not run away in a year, having gained experience. You, that I will really give you the share, as promised. Aiden was a little stunned as he digested what he had heard. He, a 20-year-old green graduate, was being offered to essentially become a co-owner of an aviation workshop, even if with a delayed effect, but still. The company will be called Sky Heritage LLC, Frank continued in the meantime. "I thought the word heritage is the key word here. You inspired me to be honest with your project. And sky, well, the sky is ours after all. Does it suit?" "Sounds great," Aiden breathed out, feeling his heart beat faster. "Excellent. I've already got my lawyer involved. They're preparing the papers." Frank smiled. "Of course, we'll formalize everything officially. The charter, shares, signatures, and more. At first, I understand, you don't have any money, so we'll also provide for a salary. Not much, but enough to live on. Let's say." He named a sum that made Aiden jump inside. Although it was modest, it was much better than he earned at Jet Center. "I agree," Aiden blurted out, unable to contain his joy. "So, do I need to sign something? Or—" Frank laughed. "Calm down, let's wash it down first." "Just kidding. We'll sign it. We'll even get together with a notary tomorrow. but it's more important for me to hear that you, my friend, are really passionate about this. Am I right about you? Aiden looked Frank straight in the eyes. I'm on fire, sir. Aviation is my life. I'll give it my all. They shook hands, sealing the agreement, albeit verbally for now. Aiden's fingers trembled slightly with excitement. Then it's decided, Frank summed up. Tomorrow we'll go formalize the LLC, and today I have an idea. We need to celebrate somehow. He squinted slyly and suddenly asked, have you been to Kansas lately? In Kansas. Aiden was surprised. Well, I haven't been there since last summer, when I left. Time to pay a visit, Frank grinned. Your plane needs to be moved here. Now we'll have everything we need to work on it. Space, people, budget. What's it doing in the barn? I suggest we go out next week in a trailer and pick up the Piper. How about it? Aiden's eyes almost filled with tears. To take his grandfather's plane. Here, where he could continue working at full capacity, he thought he saw Grandpa Raymond nodding approvingly somewhere. That would be wonderful, he said hoarsely. That's great. I've got a pickup truck with a trailer. We'll go to your Kansas, breathe in the prairie air, Frank winked. I'll meet your parents at the same time, if they don't mind. Aiden's face darkened for a moment. Parents? They would hardly approve of this whole idea, but he had already decided for himself that their skepticism would not stop. I'll warn them, was all he said neutrally. That evening, Frank and Aiden spent a long time discussing their plans, what documents were needed to obtain an FA Part 145 repair station certificate. They decided to immediately apply for a basic certificate to have the official right to repair aircraft as an organization. They discussed who they could hire, what equipment to buy, and of course, they both dreamed about what projects they would take on. We'll make your Cub the first, a show car, Frank said enthusiastically. Let the clients see that we can lift old stuff into the air. It's a great marker. Aiden smiled, not quite believing his good fortune. At some point, he left the stuffy office for a minute to get some fresh air. The evening breeze rustled the grass near the airfield. Silhouettes of planes loomed in the parking lot. Aiden dialed his mother's number she didn't pick up. It was late at night in Kansas. Then he dialed his father. Hello? The father answered sleepily. Dad, hi. Sorry it's late. I won't be long, Aiden said quickly. I wanted to let you know. Everything is fine here. I found a job, in fact. I'm starting my own business with a partner. We'll be restoring old planes. There was silence on the line. Your business? The father asked incredulously. Are you sure, son? I'm sure, Aiden answered firmly. This is what I studied for. I have a great mentor and partner. We're registering the company tomorrow. The father said something to the mother, and she, half asleep, asked again. Then the father's voice again. Well, good luck then. Just be careful not to get drawn into an adventure. Read all the papers carefully. Okay, Dad, Aiden nodded, realizing that he shouldn't expect support or praise. I just wanted to share. Okay, let me tell you more later, muttered the father. We're already going to bed here. Be careful. Good night, Aiden answered quietly, but in response there were beeps. His father had already disconnected. He sighed and put the phone away. Well, he didn't expect anything else. The main thing was that he believed in himself, and now there were people nearby who shared his dream. A week later, Frank and Aiden brought Grandpa's Piper Cub from Kansas to Florida. His parents greeted them with tension, not understanding what all the fuss was about. But Frank managed to win them over. He was a natural diplomat, and the solidity of a 50-year-old businessman inspired more confidence than the words of a young son. One way or another, the plane was loaded onto a trailer, the tools too, and they returned to Orlando. This is how the story of Sky Heritage LLC began, a new company with big ambitions and small startup capital, but with the boundless energy of its founders. The hangar at Sky Heritage was buzzing with excitement. Today was the big day, the maiden flight of the restored Piper Cub, Grandpa's plane. 2 years of painstaking work had come to an end. Aiden glanced at the Cub's yellow fuselage, shiny with fresh paint. The wings had new canvas flooring, stretched tight and varnished. The Continental engine was sparkling clean, every cylinder like new. The plane looked like it had just rolled out of the factory in 1946. Ready, Frank slapped Aiden on the back. He was wearing a leather flight helmet and goggles. Frank Evans had volunteered to pilot the Cub on its first test flight. Aiden didn't have a full pilot's license yet. He was just taking lessons, so the veteran had been entrusted with the controls. That seems to be it, Aiden exhaled, checking the last items on the checklist. The fuel is filled, the oil is at the level, the radio is working. All the employees of Sky Heritage, there were 5 of them, gathered at the hangar. There were also invited friends from the local flying club, and a couple of reporters from the local newspaper. Frank decided to make the event public for advertising. "Are the cameras set up?" Frank shouted to the cameraman, a young guy with a video camera. "Yes, sir," the one echoed, settling at the edge of the runway. Aiden felt his heart beating somewhere in his throat. He placed his hand on the side of the plane as if he wanted to transfer some of his energy to it. "Fly for us, old man," he said quietly, saying goodbye to the machine for the duration of the flight. Frank climbed into the cockpit, ran a pre-flight check of the controls, then gave a thumbs up to say everything was okay. "Get away from the propeller," shouted Aiden, standing by the propeller. The engine coughed, puffed out a cloud of smoke, and finally rumbled smoothly. The Piper came to life, vibrating with thrust. Frank taxied, and the plane slowly rolled out onto the runway. Aiden ran closer with everyone else, standing to the side at a safe distance. The cameraman aimed the camera. "Sky Heritage, test flight, Piper Cub, tail number November 8th on 187 Charlie," one of his colleagues said into the radio, transmitting to the tower. Frank turned the plane at the beginning of the runway. The roar of the engine grew louder. He set the engine to takeoff mode. A moment, and the little yellow plane ran along the asphalt, accelerating. Another second, the wheels left the ground. The Piper easily gained several meters of altitude. "It took off," one of the employees exhaled. Aiden kept his eyes open. The Cub, flapping its wings, was gaining altitude. 20 meters, 50. Then it made a smooth turn over the field. The engine was running smoothly. Without interruption, Aiden listened, ready to catch the slightest glitch, but everything was fine. The plane circled the airfield twice. Frank later admitted that he could barely hold back his tears at that moment. They had put so much soul into this machine. But then, on the ground, Aiden simply froze with a wildly pounding heart, watching the Cub pass by the hangar each time. Finally, 15 minutes later, the Piper came in for a landing. The wheels touched down softly, the plane ran and turned toward the hangar. When the engine was shut off, there was applause and joyful shouts all around. Aiden was one of the first to run up, helping Frank out of the cockpit. He took off his glasses. His eyes really did sparkle. "Congratulations, partner," Frank said hoarsely, hugging Aiden. "You did it. The plane is a sight to behold, flies like new." Aiden nodded, feeling his knees buckle with excitement. His dream had come true. His grandfather's plane was back in the sky decades later. Then a reporter jumped up with a microphone. "Mr. Evans, Mr. Manning, a few words. How do you feel?" Frank smiled and motioned for Aiden to come over. "Here is the main man of today. Ask him." Aiden was confused, but the reporter had already handed him the microphone. "Is this really your family plane? How long has it been since it flew?" "Yes, this Piper belonged to my grandfather," Aiden answered, trying to speak loudly. "It hadn't flown for over 20 years. We restored it from scratch." "Incredible. What are your plans for the plane now?" "We plan to show it at an air show, maybe let veterans fly it." He glanced at Frank, who nodded affirmatively. "And of course, it's a showcase of our company's capabilities. We can bring any bird back to life." Later that evening, when the guests had left and the excitement had died down, Aiden and Frank were left alone in the empty hangar. The Cub stood in the center, like a proud graduate. They sat next to each other on a toolbox, tired but happy. "Well, we did it," Frank said, rubbing his aching back. "Now, if only we had more clients, Otherwise, we won't get very far on enthusiasm alone. He was right. In 2 years, Sky Heritage spent almost all of Frank's savings. In addition to Piper, they took on small orders repairing engines for local pilots, buying time. But there was no major income. The company was still operating at a loss. Aiden nodded thoughtfully. I hope they'll take a closer look at us after today. We made a special video and released the news. They posted a video of the first flight online on the company's YouTube channel and on Aiden's blog. Within a few hours, it had already gained thousands of views, and people shared it on specialized forums. And indeed, literally the next day, a call rang that turned out to be fateful. Aiden was in the office, making a list of minor improvements to the Piper. They planned to touch up minor scratches, tighten the cables. The phone on the desk rang. He picked it up. Sky Heritage, hello. Hello, said a polite voice with a slight southern accent. My name is George Whitaker. I'm from Texas. I learned about your company on the internet. I saw a video about the Piper Cub. Impressive. Aiden's heart jumped. He put the phone on speaker, gesturing for Frank to come over. Nice to meet you, sir. How can we help you? He replied, trying to remain calm. I have a plane, Whitaker continued. A 1953 Cessna, model 195 business liner. You know one? Aiden exchanged glances with Frank. Of course they knew. A Cessna 195, a classic piston-engine 5-seater business jet from the 50s, quite rare. Yes, we know, it's a great car, he replied. Well, it's been sitting idle on my ranch for about 10 years, said the Texan. I was always going to do it, but I never got around to it. After your video, I thought, these are the guys who can breathe life into it. Do you take on custom restoration? Frank, unable to resist, leaned towards the speakerphone. Of course we will, Mr. Whitaker. This is exactly our specialty. Excellent. The interlocutor's voice became animated. I'm ready to bring the plane to you or send it disassembled, whichever is more convenient. The conversation about details began. Frank and Aiden took turns clarifying the condition of the plane, the scope of work, and the approximate time frame. The price was discussed cautiously for now. First, they needed to see the scope. They agreed that in a week, the client would send the plane on a lowboy along with spare parts, and then they would sign an official contract. After hanging up, Aiden and Frank looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, then happily hugged each other, dancing. We have our first serious order, laughed Aiden. Now that's what I call a breakthrough, Frank echoed. Texas, a collector. If we do it well, he'll probably recommend us to his friends. They immediately began to prepare. They cleared a place in the hangar for the future patient, wrote out a list of tools and consumables that should be purchased in advance. Excitement shone on everyone's faces. A real big deal was coming up. That evening, Aiden wrote a short message to his parents via email. It was now easier to contact them this way. We have our first big client. An order to restore an airplane from Texas. Things are looking up. The answer didn't come right away, but a day later, his mother responded, We are happy for you. Take care, Mom and Dad. Laconic, but warm in its own way. Aiden smiled. Maybe now, seeing his success, his parents will start to be at least a little proud of him. A couple of years later, Sky Heritage is no longer a new startup, but a well-known workshop in narrow circles. There were 7 employees on staff. The annual turnover exceeded $1.2 million. They had several successfully restored aircraft under their belt. Back in 2015, they completed the restoration of that very Cessna 195 from Texas. When the owner, Mr. Whitaker, arrived to accept the work, his emotions were difficult to describe in words. It's like I've gone back in time, he marveled, stroking the shining fuselage with his hand. My bird didn't look this new even when my father bought it in the 60s. Aiden and the team smiled confused. Mechanics are not used to stormy praise. You've done an outstanding job, gentlemen, Whitaker said gravely, shaking hands with Frank and then Aiden. Worth every penny. I promise to recommend you to every collector I know. And so it happened soon new orders from private individuals came through word of mouth, inspiring Sky Heritage to expand. In the spring, the company reached a major milestone, signing its first museum contract. A representative from the Mid-America Air Museum in Liberal, Kansas, visited their hangar. He flew in specifically to evaluate Sky Heritage's capabilities. The representative, Mr. Thompson, a gray-haired aviation enthusiast, walked through the workshops, examining the restored planes. "Impressive, gentlemen," he said, stopping by Cub. "I hear you raised this bird from the ashes." "That's right," Frank smiled. "Our demonstration project." Mr. Thompson turned to Aiden. "I heard you're from Kansas." "Yes, sir," Aiden confirmed, "and it would be an honor to work on an airplane for my state's museum." "Well," the representative extended his hand, "I think we've found the performers. Welcome aboard." They shook hands firmly. Soon the formalities were settled, and the museum entrusted them with the restoration of the Beechcraft T-34 Mentor trainer. For Aiden, this contract was symbolic. Even if the museum was not federal, but a city one, it was still high-level recognition. In addition, it was necessary to work with a military machine from the 50s, albeit a training one. This increased prestige. "So, do dreams come true?" Frank teased as he and Aiden, returning from the Liberal mayor's office where they had signed the agreement, raised a bottle of beer to their success. "You bet," Aiden smiled. "I would never have thought that Kansas itself would order a plane from us for restoration." He was doubly pleased. The contract with the museum of his home state seemed like a sign of fate. Having taken on several such serious projects, Sky Heritage faced a new challenge: how to grow without losing quality. Frank insisted on the principle, not to take on more than 4 aircraft at a time. Even if the queue is scheduled for a year in advance, it is better to maintain control than to swell and then suffer from chaos. "Better less, but better," he repeated. "What's important to us is the reputation of the jewelers, not the conveyor belt." Aiden agreed. They had seen examples of companies that chased quantity, took dozens of orders, and failed to cope, losing face. God was difficult but important for the company. They decided to obtain an official ISO 9001 quality certificate to comply with global standards and attract serious clients. They barely managed to cope with the 9-month audit marathon. They had to write down dozens of procedures and bring perfect order to the documentation. Some old mechanics grumbled. They said, "Red tape, no time for it." But Frank was adamant. "If we want to play big, we have to live up to it. It's like getting a car inspected. It's a hassle, but then you're confident in its reliability." At the end of the year, the efforts paid off. Auditors awarded Sky Heritage ISO 9001 certification, and soon the Federal Aviation Administration approved an expansion of the Part 145 repair station certificate. Now the company was authorized to work not only on small piston engines, but also on larger units, as well as to carry out a wide range of avionics work. This opened the door to more complex projects. To celebrate the double success, Aiden threw a small party for the employees right in the hangar. He ordered pizza, a cake with the words ISO 9001 certified and Part 145 extended, perhaps bureaucratic, but no less sweet. "We did it," he proclaimed to the team, raising his cup of punch. "Thank you all for your work. Now no one will call us garage guys. We are officially a cool organization." The mechanics hooted and clinked their sodas. At that moment, Aiden felt a great sense of pride. He and Frank had created something solid, something respected. Aiden reached a personal professional milestone. He received an inspector's license. He had been accumulating experience as a mechanic for 8 years and carefully prepared for the exams. When he found an envelope from the FA with the coveted card in his mailbox, he didn't even believe it at first. But there it was, a plastic license with his name and new powers. Now he could independently sign the airworthiness of aircraft after major repairs. "Congratulations, Inspector." Frank saluted playfully as Aiden showed him the license. "You've earned it, boy." By this time, Aiden was already effectively running the entire technical part of the company. Frank was gradually moving away from the daily fuss, focusing more on strategy, communicating with clients, and training younger employees. Age was taking its toll, although he had more than enough energy. He trusted Aiden as he trusted himself. Morske heritage became a national topic of conversation. The popular magazine Air and Space published a large article about the workshop under the title Propeller Guardians, New Life for Old Aviation. The journalist flew to them a year ago, interviewed Frank and Aiden, talked to the employees, and photographed the restoration process. The article was bright and heartfelt, and the phones in the office started ringing, and the email was full of new requests. "We have a waiting list a year and a half ahead," Aiden exclaimed, checking the updated order list. "This is crazy." "Calm down," Frank chuckled. "The four-plane rule has not been canceled. We will grow by the number of employees, not projects." That's what they decided. Instead of mindlessly grabbing all the incoming orders, Sky Heritage hired a few more craftsmen and interns and expanded the area of the rented hangars. But the principle of no more than 4 projects at a time was religiously observed. This allowed them to maintain quality and not break down due to overloads. By the end of the year, the company was firmly on its feet. Clients were coming, the reputation was brilliant. Not a single emergency or dissatisfied customer. It seemed that everything was going along an increasing upward curve. Aiden caught himself thinking that he was living a dream. A favorite business, a close-knit team, a name in the industry. What else do you need? He didn't know that very soon there would be tests of a completely different kind, ones for which no certificates or experience could prepare. The largest aviation convention in the world, IA AirVenture in Oshkosh, was crowded and noisy. Thousands of planes filled the airfield, from ultralights to thunderous wartime fighters. Sky Heritage was showing off, too. Aiden and Frank trailered Grandpa's Piper Cub and a restored Cessna 195 to display in the vintage aircraft area. At midday, sheltered from the scorching sun under the wing of a Cub, Aiden drank cold lemonade from a plastic cup. The morning had been hectic. He and his colleagues had opened hoods, allowed spectators to look inside engines, and answered dozens of questions. Now they had a moment to catch their breath. "Excuse me, are you Aiden Manning?" A female voice said nearby. Aiden turned around. In front of him stood a girl of about 25, with light brown hair pulled back into a low ponytail and a professional Canon camera around her neck. Her badge read, "Emily Conrad, freelance photographer." "Yes, it's me," he straightened up, putting his glass down. "How can I help you?" The girl smiled and gestured towards Piper. "I couldn't pass by this beauty. I'm filming a report about vintage cars in Oshkosh. Your Cub is one of the most striking exhibits. Can I take a few pictures and ask a few questions?" Aiden felt proud his plane had attracted attention. He nodded. "Of course. I always enjoy talking about him." Emily expertly began photographing the Cub from different angles, the general appearance and details, the dashboard, the shiny rivet heads on the wing. Then she switched the camera to video mode. "I'm filming," she warned. "So, please introduce yourself and tell us briefly about this plane." Aiden, slightly nervous, looking into the lens, began. "My name is Aiden Manning, and I am the co-founder of Sky Heritage. This plane is a 1946 Piper Pa-18 Super Cub, a family heirloom. It belonged to my grandfather, and we restored it from scratch and returned it to the skies." "Amazing." Emily lowered the camera. "Can I get a couple of portrait shots of you next to the plane?" He stood at the side of the Cub, trying to look natural. He clicked the camera shutter a few times. "Excellent," the girl said with satisfaction. "Thank you very much. You really have an amazing story. I would like, if you allow me, to make a short article about your workshop. I am currently writing for an online publication about aviation. Will it be possible to contact you after the show?" "Of course, no problem," Aiden rejoiced. "Here's my business card, my phone number, my email." Emily put the business card in her jeans pocket. "By the way," added Aiden, slightly embarrassed, "if you want, I can show you our Cub in action. We are planning a small demonstration flight tomorrow morning before the main program. Emily's eyes lit up. Seriously? I'll be only too happy. Will you take me as a passenger with a camera? No problem, he smiled. Come at 7 in the morning while the sky is clear. They chatted a bit more about Emily's interest in aviation photography. It turned out her father was a pilot, and she had been going to air shows since she was a child, then picked up a camera herself. Aidan told them how he and Frank had gotten the studio off the ground. The conversation flowed easily, like old friends meeting. During one of the evening shows, they sat next to each other on the grass, watching the planes making figures with fiery tracers in the sky. I've never seen anything more beautiful, Emily said quietly as the fireworks went up into the sky. Oshkosh is a magical place, Aidan agreed. Here you understand why you love the sky. He turned his head and saw the reflection of the flashes in Emily's eyes. His heart sank. What are you thinking about? She smiled, catching his gaze. I think how lucky I am to have met you, he answered honestly. Emily was embarrassed and put the camera down. You know, it really was luck. I flew to the show at the last minute on someone else's orders. I might not have gone at all. Sometimes life works out just right, Aidan said softly. They talked for a long time that night about childhood dreams, about their favorite airplanes, about what they wanted to achieve. There was a complete understanding between them, as if they had known each other for many years and not just a couple of days. The next morning, just before dawn, Aidan was preparing the Piper for takeoff. An electric car pulled up to the vintage aircraft lot, and Emily jumped out, energetic despite the early hour. Am I on time? She called, holding the camera at the ready. Like a Swiss watch, laughed Aidan. Jump in the cockpit. He took the pilot's seat, Emily in the back with the camera. After receiving clearance from the show's controller, Aidan guided the Cub onto a small grass strip and gently added throttle. The plane lifted off easily, lifting them above the awakening airfield. Emily clicked the shutter, capturing the view from above. A colorful tent city below, rows of planes. The sun gilded the Cub's wings. Aidan made a smooth circle over the field, then another, allowing her to capture whatever she wanted. How are the pictures? He called over his shoulder. Delightful, she said, the wind blowing strands of hair around her face. But she was happy. This is the best morning flight I've had in years. About 20 minutes later, they landed. Emily was literally beaming as she climbed out of the cockpit. Thank you so much, Aidan. It was unforgettable. I'm glad to try. He felt himself blushing from her sincere delight. In the days that followed, Aidan and Emily often crossed paths. They went to watch the evening air show together and sat at the same table at the contestants' dinner. They were at ease with each other. By the end of the week, they were exchanging hugs as they said goodbye, like old friends. I hope to see you again, Emily said, putting the lens back in its case. We'll definitely see each other, Aidan answered confidently. We're definitely in touch now. He watched her go. There was a strange warm feeling in his soul, not just the joy of a new acquaintance, but something more. As he and Frank drove home from Oshkosh, he loaded the plane and equipment back onto the trailer. Aidan found himself thinking about Emily Conrad. Her smile, her laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she looked at the planes. Falling in love, boy? Frank jokingly nudged him, noticing how Aidan was daydreaming. Aidan was embarrassed. Oh well, just a good girl, passionate. But inside he knew he was hooked. Really. By the beginning of the year, Aidan and Emily's relationship had become very serious. They had been texting each other every day since they met in Oshkosh and had video calls. Emily flew to Florida several times, either for another photo shoot or just to visit. Aidan also managed to find time to fly to her. Fortunately, he could now rent a small plane and had enough hours of flying time for solo flights. Emily was living in Chicago at the time, working as a freelancer, selling her photos to aviation publications. At the end of 2017, Aidan invited her to his home for the first time to get acquainted with his world, his workshop, his friends. Emily was enchanted by the atmosphere of Sky Heritage, quickly got to know everyone, and became one of the aviators. Her openness and passion conquered even the stern mechanics. Frank winked at Aiden after one such visit. Hold on to her, boy. A girl like that is a treasure. Aiden had no intention of letting go. Around Christmas 2018, he decided to take the big step. Unbeknownst to Emily, he had prepared a surprise, a small sapphire ring, the color of the sky, and a special setting for the proposal. He chose the evening when Emily was supposed to fly to Florida for the holidays. In the Sky Heritage hangar, Aiden and his colleagues decorated an old propeller with garlands and lowered it from the ceiling. Under the propeller on the table is a bouquet of her favorite wild daisies and that same velvet case with the ring. When an unsuspecting Emily entered the hangar, Aiden had invited her to supposedly see the newly restored bird. The lights suddenly dimmed, the garlands on the propeller flared up, and a soft melody began to play. The mechanics had turned on a recording of Fly Me to the Moon. Aiden dropped to one knee. Emily Conrad, he said, excitedly, marry me. I promise to love you as the sky loves wings. Emily froze for a moment, her mouth closed in astonishment, and then tears of joy glistened in her eyes. Yes, of course, yes, she exclaimed and threw herself on his neck. Applause and enthusiastic cries rang out in the hangar. The mechanics, secret accomplices, could not contain their emotions. That's how they got engaged under an old propeller among airplanes and friends. They decided to hold the wedding there in the hangar next summer in June 2019. It was symbolic and convenient, a spacious room you can decorate with aviation details. Emily herself developed the style of decoration, tables made of wings, names of planes instead of table numbers, and a small model airplane hanging above the wedding arch. On the day of the wedding, the hangar was transformed. On either side stood two of Sky Heritage's proudest exhibits, his grandfather's Piper Cub and a gleaming Beechcraft T-34 that had just been completed for the museum. Between them, under an arch of flowers and propellers, Aiden and Emily exchanged vows. Emily wore an elegant white dress, but instead of a veil, she coquettishly put on a pair of aviator sunglasses as a joke for the photo shoot. Aiden stood in a classic suit, but over it he threw his grandfather's leather aviator jacket to feel his presence at this moment. Aiden's parents came from Kansas to attend the ceremony. His mother burst into tears as she hugged her daughter-in-law. She clearly liked Emily. His father, shyly but warmly, congratulated his son, admitting, "You've come a long way, we're proud of you." Luke, his older brother, also flew in by this time. His first startup had just sold successfully, and he was looking quite successful. Just before the reception, Luke found a moment to hug his brother. "Well, brother, now you're in the married club too." He winked. "I see you and Emily are happy. Take care of her, she's great." Aiden nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Luke. And thanks for flying in. I know you're busy." "Nonsense, I won't miss such an event." Luke slapped him on the shoulder. "I'm proud of you. You've done a great job, you've built a business, and found a wonderful wife. Grandpa would be jubilant." Aiden felt warmth from these words. Finally, his older brother recognized his achievements. Luke joked that another Manning was finally getting married and gave his younger brother an expensive wristwatch to mark the occasion. Frank was the groom's best man. In his speech at the banquet, he said, "I've seen Aiden grow as a person, as a professional. But today I see him become truly happy. Emily, take care of him, and you, boy, take care of her. You were made for each other. Your love is as true as our love for the sky." The guests applauded. Aiden and Emily laughed and nodded. After their wedding, they went on a short honeymoon, flying a small chartered plane along the Florida coast, stopping at cozy coastal towns. It was the perfect trip for two aviators in love. Upon returning, the newlyweds settled into their life together. They first rented and soon bought a small house not far from the airfield so that it was a 5-minute drive to work and the runway lights could be seen from the window. The house was modest, but it was their own, family-friendly, exactly what Emily dreamed of. They got a dog, a husky puppy named Guy. Emily had wanted a dog for a long time, and Aiden happily supported the idea. Guy quickly became a favorite in their home and even a frequent guest at the Sky Heritage office. They took him with them to the hangar, where he walked around the planes importantly and demanded attention. After discussions with Frank, Emily joined Sky Heritage as a media consultant. She took on the management of the company's Instagram account, filming and editing videos for the YouTube channel, covering all significant events from the release of aircraft to participation in exhibitions. Moreover, this cooperation was formalized as a contract with an independent photographer. Frank proposed separating family relations and business, and the young people agreed with him. Emily received remuneration for projects, but did not have a share in the company. This was more peaceful for everyone. Things were going well. Sky Heritage's popularity only grew thanks to Emily's charisma on social media. Her photos and live videos collected thousands of likes, attracting new aviation fans to their workshop. As the Elastics lived in perfect harmony, supporting each other. Of course, sometimes there were arguments. Emily could get offended if Aiden stayed late in the hangar. Aiden would grumble when the house turned into a photo studio with scattered equipment. But all the quarrels were quickly settled as soon as they went to the airfield together on a day off or took a walk with Guy. Peace was restored. They thought that dozens of such happy years were waiting for them ahead. Neither Aiden nor Emily could have guessed what fate was preparing for their family. Sky Heritage was at the peak of success. Projects were scheduled. The team was on the move. It seemed to Aiden that life was in order in all areas. But one call turned the usual course upside down. At the end of January, my mother called. There was alarm in her voice. "Son, we need to talk about Luke." Aiden was wary. They usually exchanged brief news with their parents once a month and rarely spoke about their brother. "What's wrong with Luke?" he asked, walking out of the shop into a quiet corner of the office. The mother sighed heavily. "He's got problems. His second startup went bust. Investors are demanding his money back, and the sums are huge. About $400,000. $400,000. Aiden leaned against the wall, amazed by the number. "Yes," she almost whispered. "My father and I extended the mortgage on the house to help him with his first project, and now we're really scared for him. He's barely standing on his own mentally. You know, Luke, he's proud. He doesn't show it, but—" Aiden was silent. His feelings were mixed up inside. His brother had always been a favorite. His mistakes were forgiven. He was helped. And now again, he was in deep trouble. "What can I do?" he finally asked quietly. The mother hesitated. "He didn't ask, but we thought, maybe you have a place for him in the company. At least temporarily. He needs a job, support. If his brothers were nearby, it would be easier for him to survive this collapse." Aiden closed his eyes, offering Luke a job. He remembered how he himself had once needed family support and had not received it. Now the roles were reversed. "I'll talk to him," he finally answered. "Let him fly to Florida." That evening, Aiden told Emily everything. They sat in the kitchen over late tea, and he poured out his mother's worries, Luke's debts. "Oh my God." Emily shook her head. "This must be really hard for him right now." Aiden rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. "My parents want me to temporarily place him with us. I don't mind helping, but I'm afraid. We have completely different worlds." Emily gently covered his hand with hers. "This is your brother. Besides, if anyone can support him now, it is his family. Let's try. He will find something to do. You said it yourself. They wanted to implement CRM." Aiden looked at his wife with gratitude. "Thanks, Em. You're right. Let's give Luke a chance." A week later, Luke Manning arrived in Daytona Beach. Aiden met him at the airport. He hadn't seen his brother in almost 2 years, the last time being on Christmas 2022, and then only briefly. Luke had changed noticeably. He had gained a little weight. The first gray hairs had appeared at his temples. His eyes were tired, but he still held on cheerfully. "Hi, brother." Luke smiled, hugging Aiden. "How many years, how many winters?" In the car on the way, Aiden cautiously asked about business. Luke waved him off. "I screwed up. What can I say? There wasn't enough investment. The market collapsed." Anyway, I'll tell you over a beer sometime. If I live, I'll come up with something new. Mom says you owe a large sum, Aiden asked quietly. Luke's expression darkened for a moment, but then he grinned. I'll sort it out. I'm already negotiating debt restructuring, maybe through personal bankruptcy. Don't worry. Aiden nodded. He could see that his brother was uncomfortable admitting his failure. Listen, thanks for inviting me. Luke changed the subject. My parents said your business is thriving. I'm really happy about that. And a beautiful wife and a business. I'm proud of you. Aiden did not expect such praise and felt embarrassed. We tried. Okay, tomorrow we'll start bringing you up to speed. Aiden did not take Luke home. They had agreed in advance that his brother would stay in inexpensive apartments near the airfield. Luke himself insisted, saying he did not want to inconvenience. Emily knew about the situation by that time and supported her husband's decision to help her brother. The next day, Aiden brought Luke to the Sky Heritage office. The spacious room overlooked the hangar and was filled with desks for employees and a board with current projects. Luke looked around with interest. You've got yourself settled in nicely here, he whistled. We're trying, Aiden answered modestly. Come on, I'll introduce you to the team. The employees greeted the boss's brother in a friendly manner, although with some curiosity. In a close-knit group, a newcomer is always an event. Frank, of course, knew the situation and behaved correctly. He shook Luke's hand, joked about 2 Mannings on my head. Emily arrived at the office a little later. She usually edited photos at home in the mornings. When she saw Luke, she threw up her hands. Oh, hello, you finally came to see us. They embraced warmly. Luke had been charmed by his brother's friendly and bright wife at the wedding, but they had barely spoken. Now he would have to work side by side with her. Over coffee, Aiden outlined Luke's responsibilities. We could really use your skills right now. We're implementing a CRM system for managing projects and clients' HubSpot. You're an IT specialist. Can you handle the integration? Easy, Luke responded confidently. I've tried all the CRM platforms in startups. We'll just give you limited access, Frank added good-naturedly. Accounting and finance aren't your area, you understand. Of course I understand, Luke nodded without offense. I'm here temporarily, and I don't want to see anything extra. So he got into the work. At first, everything went smoothly. Luke quickly set up HubSpot, transferred client contacts, built sales funnels, trained the secretary to enter data on new applications. Aiden was happy he himself had not gotten around to these modern subtleties. Gradually, Luke began to offer ideas outside of his immediate duties. One day at lunch, he said, Listen, Emily, why aren't you on TikTok yet? This topic is popular especially for young people. You can tell them about aviation, make viral videos. Emily shrugged. I never get around to it. I make long videos on YouTube, and dancing to music on TikTok is not my style. You don't have to dance like that, Luke laughed. You can make short videos about restoration processes, about the history of airplanes. It's a treasure trove of content. I'd like to take a look. Emily narrowed her eyes. The idea is nothing. I just haven't worked on this platform. Do you think it's worth it? Sure. Luke was enthusiastic. I can help. I have a ton of ideas on how to hook people. I'm not an expert, but I've seen successful examples. Aiden, listening, only smiled. His wife and brother found common ground as colleagues. He did not object any advertising of the company is useful. And so their TikTok strategy was born. With everyone already busy during work hours, Emily and Luke often stayed late into the evening, dreaming up scripts for short videos, editing footage on their phones. They laughed, picking out funny moments from hangar life. Guy, their husky, dragging a rag around the shop, a mechanic dozing in the cockpit of an airplane. The first few videos unexpectedly shot gained tens of thousands of views. Sky Heritage received a stream of new subscribers. Aiden was sincerely happy. His brother and wife are a great team. But not everyone found this closeness normal. One day, at the end of the workday, Frank called out to Aiden. Do you have a minute? I have something to do. They walked to the side. Frank leaned against the workbench and asked quietly, "Don't you notice anything strange?" "What are you talking about?" Aiden didn't understand. Frank nodded towards the office, where the silhouettes of Emily and Luke, laughing and bent over the phone, were visible through the glass. "About your, TikTok assistants." Aiden frowned slightly. "Everything seems to be fine. They are great. They have revived our social networks." "Well done," Frank drawled, "but they're having too much fun together." "You mean?" Aiden didn't even find the words right away. "You think they're having an affair? Come on, Frank." He grinned, but suddenly something unpleasant jumped inside. "I'm not saying anything." Frank raised his hands. "But I know for sure. People talk. It's a small world. Last week, your Emily was seen at the airport sitting late in a cafe with some man. I later found out it was Luke." "They were discussing work," Aiden replied sharply. "I know. They went to shoot sunset shots of planes taking off." Frank looked at him carefully. "Okay? Just be on guard, okay? I'm an old soldier. I can tell when something's wrong." "Thank you for your concern, but everything is fine," Aiden snapped, ending the conversation. Frank spread his hands and walked away, muttering, "As you wish." Left alone, Aiden glanced at Emily and Luke. They were just leaving the office, discussing something animatedly. Luke was playfully holding his hand to his heart, apparently feigning delight. Emily was laughing. "It's okay," Aiden told himself firmly. "They're my brother and my wife. They just became friends." He wanted to believe it. And for the next few months, nothing bad seemed to happen. Luke continued to help, although he had already completed the main tasks on CRM. Now he was more of a handyman, consulting on it issues. Aiden was going to pay him his fee honestly and say goodbye, as they had agreed at the start. But neither Luke nor his parents talked about specific deadlines. In the spring, business was in full swing. Projects were burning, clients were coming. Emily was preparing a big video for SkyHeritage's 10th anniversary, collecting archival video, interviewing old clients. Luke actively helped her, especially in the technical aspects of editing. Aiden reassured himself everything was going well, but the shadows of doubt, once planted, did not go away. He chased them away. Who knows what gossip? People loved to chat. December. Aiden felt fatigue creeping up on him. The year had been long, there were many projects, and a well-earned Christmas break was ahead. But there had been a tension at home in recent weeks that he couldn't quite put his finger on. Emily often seemed distracted, sometimes pale. She blamed exhaustion, saying she might have caught a mild virus. Luke had also changed. He avoided meeting his brother's gaze, became quieter, and sometimes disappeared altogether in the evenings, citing either business or new meetings with investors. He, by the way, was looking for opportunities to revive the business. He mentioned this. One evening, Aiden returned home earlier than usual. A call with a Western client had been canceled. The house was quiet. Emily was lying in the bedroom, covered with a blanket, sleeping. Guy, their husky, approached Aiden, quietly wagging his tail, as if sensing that something was wrong. Aiden wanted to cover his wife better and noticed her phone on the bedside table. The screen was on. Apparently, a message had arrived. Not wanting to peek, he still mechanically lowered his gaze. There was a short text from an unknown number. "Emily, we confirm, 6 weeks pregnant. Congratulations." Aiden froze. His heart skipped a beat. Pregnancy. He carefully picked up the phone to make sure he wasn't mistaken. The message was from a clinic. Everything inside him turned upside down. 6 weeks. He and Emily weren't planning on having a baby now. And to be honest, they hadn't had many close nights in recent months' work, fatigue. But 6 weeks ago, he frantically tried to remember. They hardly saw each other. Then Aiden was on a business trip to a customer. His throat tightened with a spasm. He gently woke Emily. What does this mean?" She opened her eyes, not immediately understanding, but when she saw the phone in his hand and her husband's expression, she understood everything. She sat up abruptly, her lips trembling. "Aiden, I wanted to say." He felt anger and despair boiling inside him. "Are you pregnant? From whom?" Emily burst into tears. Forgive me. Forgive me. At that moment, Aiden understood everything without words. The ice of horror gripped him. Only one person could be the father. Is it Luke? He barely managed to utter the two words, but they contained the hope of denial. Emily covered her face with her hands, tears streaming through her fingers. Silence. 6 weeks of silence, lies everything became clear. Aiden felt the blood rush to his head. He had never imagined himself capable of such rage. The world before his eyes turned red. So my brother and my wife. The voice broke. How could you? Emily sobbed. It was. We didn't want to. Everything started spinning. It's my fault, Aiden wasn't listening. He jumped up, feeling that he had to leave immediately, otherwise he wouldn't be able to hold back. Gaius began to whine anxiously at his feet. Don't touch me, he recoiled when Emily tried to grab his hand. Don't you dare come near me. The look he gave her was full of pain and disgust. He snatched his jacket off the chair and ran out, slamming the door. The cool night air hit him in the face, but did not sober him up. Aiden jumped into the car and rushed off at full speed somewhere just away from home, from betrayal, from unbearable pain. 15 minutes later, he realized he was driving along a deserted highway along the coast. It was a moonless night. The ocean roared behind low dunes to the right. The salty wind hit his face. There was no car, no light around, just the highway and the stars. His heart was pounding wildly. His hands were shaking on the wheel. He stopped on the side of the road, jumped out, and slammed his fist into the hood of the car. The pain in his knuckles at least switched his consciousness a little. Scenes flashed before her eyes. Emily and Luke laughing together over the phone, their hugs at the wedding, so friendly then, her brother's sly look. It's a small world, Frank's warning suddenly surfaced. Damn, Aiden slammed his fist into the road sign. The metal clanged, the skin was torn off his fingers, blood spurted, but he didn't feel it. He took out his phone. His hands dialed Luke's number on their own. Pick up the phone, you little bastard. Aiden muttered through his teeth, listening to the beeps. Finally, yes, brother? Luke's voice was hesitant. Don't you dare call me brother, Aiden exploded. How could you? You took advantage of my home, my trust, and slept with my wife. Aiden, Luke began, but he didn't let him speak. Shut up. I'm waiting for you right now in the hangar. If you don't show up in half an hour, I'll find you myself, and you'll be in trouble. He hung up without listening to excuses. When Luke entered the dim hangar of Sky Heritage, Aiden was already there. He was sitting on the step leading up to the small plane, his head bowed, a bloody handkerchief clutched in his hand. He heard footsteps and stood up. Aiden, Luke began carefully, keeping his distance. These sounds were enough for Aiden's rage to overwhelm him again. He rushed at his brother. Beat me, he croaked, wiping the blood from his mouth. You deserve to knock the wind out of me. Aiden jumped up and grabbed Luke by the collar. You destroyed my family. Why? I sheltered you, trusted you. He shook his brother. His eyes were burning. Out of the whole world, you only found your own brother's wife to sleep with. Luke didn't resist. His eyes were filled with shame and pain. I have nothing to say, except that I'm shit, I know. Aiden let go of the collar and hit it again with all his might. Luke closed his eyes in pain. It wasn't revenge or anything, Luke croaked, spitting out blood. We didn't plan it. We just got close. Shut up! Aiden raised his fist again, but then someone's voice shouted. Enough! Frank stood at the entrance, attracted by the noise. He lived in the house next to the hangar. He quickly ran up and grabbed Aiden's hand tightly. That's it, boy, don't kill him. Aiden was breathing heavily. Luke was sitting on the floor with his head down. Get out of here, Aiden said to his brother through clenched teeth. Don't let your spirit be here again. Get out. Luke, clutching his bruised side, slowly stood up. He tried to meet his brother's gaze, but couldn't. He turned away. I'm sorry, was all he whispered before trudging towards the exit, limping heavily. When the footsteps faded, Aiden collapsed back onto the floor. his back leaning helplessly against the chassis wheel. His whole body was shaking. Frank sat down silently next to him, putting his hand on his shoulder. The minutes of silence dragged on for a long time, interrupted only by Aiden's hoarse breaths. "It hurts so much, Frank," was all he finally managed to squeeze out, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. "It hurts so much." The gray-haired mechanic sighed heavily and squeezed his shoulder tighter. "I know, man. I know." They sat side by side in the darkness of the hangar until dawn. Aiden did not cry. The tears seemed to freeze inside, burning his soul. He thought about how only yesterday he had a loving wife and a brother whom he helped, and today emptiness and ruins. Towards morning, Frank asked cautiously, "What are you going to do?" Aiden rubbed his face with his palms. His voice sounded hoarse but firm. "What do you need? Divorce, dismissal, and let them both go, wherever they want." Frank nodded. He helped Aiden up and drove him to his home. He couldn't drive in such a state. On the way, Aiden noticed in the mirror, 2 telltale streaks still glistened on his eyes. He quickly wiped them away with his hand. The hardest days of his life were ahead of him. But he already knew what to do like a pilot in an accident. Hold the control stick firmly and perform all the necessary procedures, despite the pain. January, Aiden felt burnt out. But there were many formalities ahead that required a cool head. He hired an experienced family lawyer, and the divorce case was launched right after the New Year holidays. Under Florida law, divorces were not instantaneous. There was a mandatory 30-day cooling-off period and mediation session. Aiden and Emily, though they couldn't look at each other without pain, decided to act in a civilized manner. In mid-January, they sat at a conference table in a small room at a law firm. Both lawyers were present, as was the mediator, an older woman with a soft voice who was trying to diffuse the situation. So, the mediator began calmly, "We are here to reach an agreement on key issues: division of property, financial support, possible obligations for the child." Emily looked down at the word child. Aiden clenched his jaw but said nothing. Aiden's lawyer outlined their proposal. The house purchased by the couple remains Emily's. Aiden undertook to pay Emily 5% of the unpaid dividends of Sky Heritage on the date of signing the agreement as compensation for her contribution to the development of the media brand. The issue of alimony for Emily's maintenance will be decided after the birth of the child through the court, taking into account the uncertainty regarding paternity. The last clause was veiled, but everyone understood. The child is not Aiden's, but legally it cannot be formalized until paternity is established. Emily immediately stated that she will not demand anything from Aiden for the child after the birth. Luke will acknowledge paternity, and all obligations will pass to him. The lawyers nodded, recording this in the protocol. Emily hardly argued with the terms. She seemed broken and agreed to everything, if only to cause Aiden less pain. She accepted the house. "I will need a corner for the child," she said quietly. She would have refused a share in the business, but Aiden insisted through a lawyer. It's fair, she really did a lot for the name of the company. By the end of the meeting, an agreement was almost reached. All they had to do was wait for the end of the cooling-off period for the judge to approve the divorce. As they were leaving the hall, Emily suddenly turned to Aiden. Forgive me for everything." Aiden looked past her, through the wall. "I wish you happiness, Emily, with him." He didn't say another word, turned around and left. In late January, Sky Heritage's board of directors, formally consisting of 2 people, Frank and Aiden, held an extraordinary meeting. The agenda: termination of the consulting agreement with Mr. Luke Manning. Luke did not show up, and he was not invited. "Let's vote," Frank said dryly. "For..." "Yes," Aiden responded. The decision was made unanimously, Frank summed up, putting the minutes aside. "Have they contacted him yet?" Aiden nodded. "I sent an official letter to his email, and a copy was courier-delivered to his apartment. The letter notified that all work had ceased and demanded the return of equipment, a service laptop, and a pass. It also contained a reminder about the signed NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. At the beginning of the cooperation, Luke signed a standard confidentiality document, and now he was additionally sent a notice of liability if he tried to disclose anything about SkyHeritage's affairs. Luke responded briefly, via email, acknowledged. No information will be released. Sorry it all turned out this way. Luke. Aiden looked at this, sorry it turned out this way, for a long time, feeling another surge of anger. But he only replied, acknowledged receipt. In February, news came. Luke had officially filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy protection. This meant that he planned to restructure his debts and pay them off in installments according to a plan approved by the court. Aiden was indifferent to the news. His parents wrote that they were helping their brother hire a good financial consultant and were trying to negotiate with investors. They also mentioned that Luke was planning to stay in the United States. There was no talk of fleeing the country. In the letter, his mother carefully added, "We do not condone his actions and are very worried about both of you. We hope that you can make peace someday." Aiden did not answer. He was not ready to think about reconciliation. The wound was too fresh. The divorce was granted. The Mannings' marriage was officially over. Without any extra hearings, the judge simply ran through the settlement agreement and signed the decision. Emily was not present, perhaps for the best. After the divorce, Aiden finally moved out of their house. He rented a small studio apartment near the airfield. In fact, he moved closer to work. In the house where Emily stayed, he took only his personal belongings and a funny detail. His grandfather's diploma as an aircraft mechanic hung on the wall in the office, and Aiden decided that he would take it for himself. The family's memory belonged to him. The parents were devastated when they learned of the divorce. The father called, but the conversation was strained. "Son, hold on. We never thought it would turn out like this." The father's voice sounded muffled. "It's our fault, too. We did it all ourselves." Aiden was silent on the phone, but you could hear his father sigh heavily. "If you can forgive us," his voice trembled. Then there was silence. Aiden swallowed, feeling a lump in his throat, but answered quietly, "I don't blame you." That's where the conversation ended. A few days later, Aiden received a long email from his mother. She poured out her feelings. "Dear son, I can't find words to express how much pain this has caused us. Your father and I love you both, you and Luke. We don't condone what he did. It's just heartbreaking that it happened. You are strong. You were always our proud boy, even if we rarely showed it. Forgive us for everything. We pray that you find happiness and that someday in the future you can forgive your brother." Aiden read these lines with a heavy heart. He answered briefly, assuring them that they should not choose sides. He was not demanding that they break off relations with Luke, and asked them not to worry about him. But he could not do more. He still did not have the mental strength to communicate. Emily gave birth to a boy in the summer. Aiden found out about it after the fact. A lawyer reported that Luke Manning was listed as the father on the birth certificate. There was no need for alimony court. All issues had been settled earlier. Warm relations with his parents were also a thing of the past, but communication did not stop. Once a month, his mother wrote him an email. She told him family news about health, about distant relatives, avoiding the topic of Luke and Emily. At Easter and Christmas, they sent small parcels, homemade cookies, a hand-knitted woolen scarf. Aiden opened the boxes with a lump in his throat every time. He thanked them, sometimes sending a return gift, for example, a photo album with views of old planes for his father, which he loved to look at. But the closeness that could have arisen in recent years again turned into cautious politeness. Everyone tried to somehow move on. The most severe personal shocks did not break Aiden completely, probably only thanks to work. He threw himself into SkyHeritage projects. He spent whole days in the hangars, often sleeping right on a folding bed in the office. Frank and the team tried to support him. No one asked unnecessary questions. They simply took on as much routine work as possible, leaving Aiden with the most interesting engineering tasks to distract him. The pain didn't go away, it just lurked inside, gradually turning into a cold determination. Aiden now lived only for his business. Perhaps from the outside it looked sad, but he didn't know how to cope with grief any other way. He had to fly on, despite the hole in his heart. The summer was hot in every sense. Aiden, who was completely immersed in work, did not even notice how June had arrived on the calendar exactly 14 months since the day Sky Heritage applied to participate in the prestigious competition project. And now, finally, the news has arrived. We won the grant. The secretary ran into the office waving a fax. They sent confirmation. It just arrived. Aiden looked up from the drawings, not believing his ears. One, the same one on XP82. The secretary nodded, smiling from ear to ear. Yes, IA and the Museum Foundation have selected Sky Heritage to restore the XP82 twin Mustang. Congratulations. Aiden took the sheet of paper with trembling hands. The official notice stated that Sky Heritage had been named the winner of the grant competition. The sum of $600,000 jointly from the IA and the museum's sponsorship fund was allocated for the restoration of the experimental XP-82 fighter. Further details, deadlines, contract would be discussed at a meeting in a week. He slowly sank into a chair. Here it was, the summit they had been heading towards for so long. The twin Mustang was a rare aircraft, one of only 2 remaining in the world. Entrusting it to them was a great honor and responsibility. Well, congratulations, Frank said quietly as he appeared in the doorway. He already knew, apparently, the secretary had managed to shout the news to him on the way. Aiden looked up at his senior partner. For the first time in months, he smiled truly, albeit with a hint of sadness, but still. Thank you. We did it, Frank. He came in and clapped him on the shoulder. You bet they did. Remember, 2 years ago, we dreamed of a federal contract. Sure, it's not the Smithsonian, but IA is cool too. And the budget is decent. I'd take the XP-82 for free, Aiden admitted, looking at the facts again. With such a chance, we'll go down in history. We can't do it for free, we have people and expenses, Frank said judiciously. But I know what you mean. They looked at each other with understanding. For both of them, this project meant something special, like the highest height their company had ever reached. A week later, representatives of the IA and the Museum Foundation flew to Daytona Beach to sign the contract. The Sky Heritage conference room was filled with a business-like atmosphere, folders with documents, cups of coffee, handshakes. Aiden, as the technical director, and Frank, as the general manager, signed the multi-page contract. The process of choosing a contractor was indeed long. They submitted an application in the spring of 2024, then showed the commission their workshops, demonstrated previous work. The museum's T-34 and Cessna 195 made an impression. The FA conducted an unscheduled inspection of their documentation, and thanks to ISO, there was nothing to find fault with. And so, the contract came into force. The restoration period for the twin Mustang is 3 years, until mid-2028, with stages by year and strict reporting. Once the representatives had left, Aiden gathered the team. Everyone huddled around a huge XP-82 blueprint spread out on the table. Friends, we have a big challenge, he began, looking around at the mechanics' faces. This project will show what we are capable of. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Forward, someone shouted, and the others applauded. Frank raised his hand to get attention. One addition. We will grow as a team, but we will keep the quality rule. Maximum 4 projects at a time, remember. XP-82 will take 2 slots for sure. The rest we will not disperse. The team nodded, everyone agreed. That evening, Aiden and Frank sat alone in the empty office, a bottle of ginger ale on the table. They had forgotten to drink champagne in the hustle and bustle. How are you? Frank suddenly asked quietly, looking at Aiden. He knew that his partner didn't mean work. He shrugged. I live. I work. There is no other way. Frank was silent for a moment. Listen, I have an idea. We'll need additional people for this project. But I wouldn't just take ready-made specialists from the outside. What if we invest in an internship program? Train young people, like I once did for you. Aiden smiled slightly with the corner of his lips. I thought about that too. Great idea. You're from Kansas, Frank continued. Maybe we should give the guys there a chance. You have aviation colleges and technical schools. Yes, I'll contact a teacher from my school. He once wrote about students who are passionate about technology. Aiden perked up. We'll recruit a couple of interns and immerse them in a real project. Frank raised the bottle. To the future, partner. They clinked glasses and took a sip of fizzy ale. You know, Aiden said quietly, looking at the foaming bubbles, a year ago I thought I'd lost everything. But the heights we've reached together, it kept me going. If it weren't for work, if it weren't for you, I might have fallen into a tailspin. Frank looked at him intently. You're stronger than you think, boy. Yes, you had a reserve of altitude in the form of a life's work, friends. And you did the right thing by not throwing away the steering wheel. Aiden nodded. These words were not just a metaphor. He really felt that only many years of persistence in the matter had prevented him from collapsing. The conversation smoothly moved to work matters. They discussed where to get rare spare parts for the Allison V11710 and argued about the method of restoring the Duralumin skin. But in Aiden's soul, something resembling a quiet hope had already begun to warm up. He looked at the large-scale drawing of a twin fuselage aircraft on the wall and thought that perhaps life was not over yet. There would be a new height. In early fall, Aiden did indeed go to his native Kansas. He made arrangements with the director of the local aviation college and gave a speech to senior students. Standing at the board in a familiar classroom, he once attended a mechanics course here. Aiden told the young people about his work. He showed slides. Here is an old, broken-down Piper Cub in 2008, and here it is shining and flying. Here is the Sky Heritage team next to a restored Cessna. The students watched with shining eyes. The main thing is to believe in yourself and not be afraid to work hard, concluded Aiden. I was once a guy from the provinces who dreamed of airplanes. And here I am standing in front of you, my dream has come true. I am waiting for your resumes. We will give the best ones a chance to work on the unique twin Mustang project. There was applause in the hall. After the meeting, several guys surrounded Aiden with questions. He answered patiently, handed out business cards. A little further away, he noticed an elderly couple, a mother and father. They secretly came to listen to his speech, not daring to approach earlier. Aiden, having let the students go, stood awkwardly in front of his parents. "Hello," he said quietly. "Hello, son," the father answered just as quietly. The mother wiped the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. They were silent for a few moments, not knowing what to say. Then the father said hoarsely, "Well spoken. We are very proud of you." "Thank you, Dad," Aiden said, "and thanks for coming." The mother stepped forward. "Can I hug you?" Aiden nodded. She hugged her son carefully. His father put his hand on his back, too. It was a short family hug, timid but sincere. Then they sat together for about 10 minutes on a bench at the entrance to the technical school, talking about trifles, the weather, new plans for the museum in Liberal. The parents had gone there the day before to see the exhibition. No one mentioned past troubles. Everyone understood that it was still too early. But when Aiden left for the airport, his heart was a little lighter. The gap between him and his parents was gradually closing. So two young guys appeared in Sky Heritage, full of delight and excitement. Now Aiden was their mentor. It was quiet in the Sky Heritage hangar. The workday was over. The mechanics had gone home. Aiden was sitting in a small office next to the hangar, giving a phone interview for Classic Wings magazine. The journalist asked the last question. "What have you learned from all these years, both the ups and the downs?" Aiden thought for a few seconds. Then he answered slowly, clearly formulating his thoughts. "I lost my marriage, but I kept my life's work. The altitude I had accumulated over 15 years allowed me not to crash into the ground when the engine died. Now I try to pass this lesson on to our young trainees. Gain altitude early, it will come in very handy when the engine suddenly fails." "Well said," the journalist noted. "Thank you for the conversation, Mr. Manning. The material will be out next month." "I'll wait," Aiden smiled and disconnected the connection. He leaned back in his chair. He rarely thought about Luke and Emily now. At first, his heart flared with anger at the mere mention, but time had done its job. Only a slight pain remained, like from an old scar. Somewhere out there, far away, they had their own lives. Perhaps their child was growing up healthy. Aiden did not wish them harm, but he did not intend to return them to his fate. Outside the office window, the silhouette of an airplane was visible, that same Piper Cub of his grandfather, now officially registered in the FA registry under its tail number. The plane was in operation, and from time to time, Aiden lifted it into the air to the delight of himself and those around him at the airfield. At Aiden's feet, lying with his muzzle on his paws, was the faithful husky Guy. Hearing that his master had stopped talking, the dog raised his head and looked questioningly. "It's all good, my friend," Aiden said quietly, lowering his hand and scratching Guy behind the ear. Frames of diplomas and certificates hung on the office wall, his recent IA inspector's certificate and a worn old A&P mechanics diploma, the same one that had belonged to Raymond's grandfather. Next to it was a recent Air and Space magazine clipping with an article about Sky Heritage. Aiden had been reluctant to hang it out of modesty, but Frank had insisted, "Let the young people see something to strive for." Aiden stood up and stretched. There was a folder of documents on the table in the corner that needed to be signed tomorrow morning. The folder contained internship contracts for 2 mechanical engineering students from Kansas whom he and Frank had selected to participate in the twin Mustang project. Aiden had personally traveled to his hometown, addressed the students at the aviation college, and invited the best to apply. He opened the office door and walked out into the hangar. 2 young men in overalls appeared at the hangar doors, those same new interns. They lingered, tidying up. Seeing Aiden, the guys smiled. "Mr. Manning, we're done for today," one said. "Excellent. Go and rest. We have a lot of work tomorrow," answered Aiden. "You know," the second one said sheepishly, "we read about your Piper Cub. It's inspiring. We dream of restoring our own plane someday." "You will definitely restore it," Aiden nodded. "Just gain altitude, study, work with soul. Then no difficulties will knock you off course." The interns looked at each other and answered in unison. "We will try." They left, and Aiden stood for a few minutes, watching their youthful, impetuous silhouettes. The future belonged to people like them, and he was glad to be their mentor. In the twilight, the hangar seemed mysterious. The huge fuselage of the XP-82 occupied the central place, covered with a tarpaulin. Work on it was just beginning. A couple more planes were standing nearby undergoing restoration, but the order and cleanliness were pleasing to the eye. Aiden walked slowly past his Piper Cub, gently running his hand over the smooth yellow skin. He remembered his grandfather, how they had dreamed of lifting this plane into the sky for the first time 19 years ago. How much has happened since then? "Thank you, Grandpa," he whispered, looking at the Cub's propeller, quietly gleaming in the dim light of the lamps. "You were right. Patience and hard work work wonders." Guy snorted as if he agreed. Aiden smiled and headed for the exit, turning off the light. Tomorrow was a new day with a meeting on the twin Mustang project, with training interns, with the usual concerns of his favorite business. The night greeted him softly with cool air. Aiden locked the hangar door and glanced at the starry sky. The light of an airplane was blinking high. Someone was making their flight through the darkness. Aiden took a deep breath. He knew he had some altitude to spare. That meant he could level out any flight, even if the engine failed again one day. After all, he now knew for sure the main rule of a pilot's and mechanic's life. Never give up and always have a reserve for an unforeseen event. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.